Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Identity Podcast right here, presented to you by Find Your ID NYC. Of course, we are live via YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch, all via the Identity Podcast. Don't forget to check out the Identity Podcast on all streaming platforms. Listen to the show and watch the show every Wednesday at 7:15 p.m. Eastern Time. And of course, follow us on all social media platforms as well, including TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube, all at the Identity Podcast. Of course, if you love the Identity Podcast, well, guess what? You can sponsor us if you want to do so. All you have to do is email us at press@findyouridnyc.com, and we'll get back to you with more details via that. And of course, don't forget to join the Identity Podcast and Going Green, helping save the earth. But in the meantime, I am Caleb, one of your co-hosts, along with my fellow and lovely co-host. I mean, he's just so lovely, it's unreal. Tarek, that is. He's pretty great. I'm just so grateful to have him, to be with him every single week. But Tarek, how are you today?
I'm doing well. I'm doing very well. I got a chance to spend some time in Washington Square Park. That's where I did my last promotion for Kanchan here, and it was awesome. It was. Then it stormed, and I got a lot of pollen in my eyes. So, forgive me, y'all, if I look crazy right now. But I'm with my lovely co-host, Caleb. No, I'm joking. No, I'm so happy to be here with you guys. This is going to be a great show. We have a wonderful guest. I did a little bit of reading up on her. But yeah, without further ado, let's introduce Kanchan Singh. Woo! We used to have a button. Bring the crowd in. I'm joking.
Was that like a cheering button? Cheering crowd button?
I need to download an app.
So what's going on? How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm a bit up and down. It's one of those days.
I
feel that.
Yeah.
Full moon today.
Yeah, it's an intense one, I think.
Yeah,
I'm feeling it. But I say I'm feeling it like every full moon. I'm like, do I just say that? Or is this like the real connection that me and the moon have? Like, unclear. Unconfirmed by the moon, but I'm feeling it.
Yeah, there's something going on between you and the moon. Maybe the moon won't talk about it, but fingers crossed. But that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, we have these up and down days, and I think what's so awesome about the Identity Podcast is that's part of our identity, especially as humans, or as we started a little late today. Things happen,
Yeah.
And I highlight the things that we've done the achievements that you've done in your time. That's kind of what we're going to speak about today, and some of the things that you may not probably share about others about your identity. And I think that this will be like a great opportunity for everyone to kind of get to know you as well.
Yeah.
So where did it all begin for you? As I always ask to get people started, like what made you start writing? What made you want to even be an entrepreneur? I mean, we can go through so many different things.
Yeah. Yeah, so like my love for the arts started at a very young age. Like I was an artist and a singer and a dancer as a child, but I grew up in India and, not with I wasn't in like a well-off home. And so when you're in those kinds of situations, it's not really about the arts, it's about survival. And so, with my parenting and all of that, it was very intense. It was like, do like engineering or computer science and get a job and blah, 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 so the arts kind of got beaten out of me at a very young age. I also kind of grew up in like a very traumatic sort of like intense household. But that's where it started. And then it kind of just got shoved away for a very long time. I moved to the US when I was in my teens and then went to college here and studied like first aerospace engineering, and then that was like really intense because I picked like the hardest engineering.
I was like, you're going to space.
Yeah, it was intense. And eventually ended up majoring in finance and IT. But in college is when I kind of learned about social entrepreneurship, which was this idea that you have a business, and as a result of your business, you're making your community or the world a better place just because of like the model of your business. And I just loved that idea. And I was like, I want to do this, but with animals. I didn't know how at the time, but it was just like, I want to have my own company and I wanted to help animals somehow. Then after college, went off and worked in consulting in IT because, again, still in please dad mode and hardcore immigrant mode of survival. And about 2 years in was when I call it like my first identity crisis. I've had many identity crises by this point, but like it was my first one where I was just like, I was falling apart in that job, like internally. And I didn't realize then at the time that like I am somebody who's very connected to myself. And so the more I'm like betraying myself, the more I feel it. Like a lot of my depression and stuff like that has come from like self-betrayal. And so anyway, so that job and like what I was doing with my life at that time was like purely to please my dad, purely to like have this societal kind of, thing. And so I was getting depressed like more and more depressed. And so I decided to travel to Thailand and volunteer at an elephant sanctuary because it was something I'd been wanting to do for a long time. And it just kind of felt like a way to get my soul back. And I was like, I just need to feel like alive again. And so I went to Thailand, volunteered at the elephant sanctuary, and like really loved what was being done there. And as somebody who had worked in shelters all my teens, I was like, if people just paid to come in, that money could be used to create like better living conditions rather than like these cages that these animals are so anxious and withdrawn in. But then I was like, stupid Kanchan, who would pay to see dogs and cats? These are elephants. So like, I just kind of like thought it was a stupid idea. But on that same trip, like on the last day, it was my 24th birthday, these two guys that I'd met on the road, this British guy and this German guy, they took me to a cat cafe because they had watched me feed every stray dog and cat in sight for like breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day. So they were like, this girl clearly likes animals. And so I remember when I went to the cat cafe, it was like walking inside the answer to the question that I've been asking myself, and I just like fell in love. And I turned to the friends and I was like, I'm going back to the US, I'm quitting my job and I'm starting a cat cafe. And they're like, we're doing the same thing. Britain needs this, Germany needs this. And when I actually did it, I'm still in touch with them. They were like, you're crazy. You meant it. I was like, yeah, I did. They were like, we thought that was a joke. But like literally on the plane ride back, it was a United flight. I remember I just kept taking napkins, like United napkins. And the air hostess was probably like, what does this girl need 40 napkins for? But I like mapped out our entire business plan like on that flight back to the US. So by the time I landed, like literally between leaving Thailand and getting to the US, I kind of like had it all mapped out. Obviously after that came a lot of ridicule because cat cafes at the time, now there's like over like 24 or something in the US. At the time there were none. And so like people thought I was like really nuts and really crazy. By the way, I'm giving you a very long story. So at any point that you want to like stop.
Well, it's funny. I was I didn't want to like stop you because this story is amazing, but I was like, you don't have to sum this up in 5 minutes. Like, to be honest, like I would love to revisit some of the earlier stuff as well. But if you want to, keep going, it's cool. Let's at least just finish the entrepreneurship with the cat cafe and how that all ended. And then we can come back for sure.
Yeah. Because I realized you asked me about writing, and then because it's connected to it, like it's like how.
That's why we're here. Yeah, we're here for it for sure. Yeah. If you want to tell the full story, we can go back and do it like that. That's for sure.
Yeah,
I'm definitely interested.
either or works for me. So whatever, this is your podcast, and whatever style you guys like to go for, I'll go with it.
Well, I do want to know what happened. So you came back here and you were like the first one to ever make a cat cafe. I was going to interject. I've been to Japan. So when I was in Japan, I realized they had maid cafes as well as cat cafes.
Yeah.
And that was like so commonplace, but it was very weird for me when I first went out there. So I definitely understand that. And I'm sure that didn't really become a craze till much later because I went when I was like 16. So that was quite a time ago.
Yeah.
So, wow, that's amazing that you broke through with that. I think part of the joke of them is just showing like how big your heart was, and I kind of wanted to go back fully to this and like, have you always had like a big connection to other people, to other animals, or is that like something that you've kind of grown over time to kind of experience?
Yeah, no, I've always had a massive connection to both. Like I'm an empath. I'm very, very empathic to like just living beings. Like I like to think of it just as living beings. With animals specifically, like in kindergarten, was when I learned, like in my child brain, when I used to eat meat, it was animals died, and so then we ate them. It made sense. I was like, cool, great, sounds fabulous. And then I went to school and I learned like animals died because we ate them, and it like shattered my world.
You're like, because yeah,
yeah. And I like came home and declared that I was going vegetarian, and my parents were like, "You're 5," or however old I was, and they're like. And I never touched meat again in my entire life. And so like it was just like I'm just very empathic, and I'm very like connected to animals and people, like with the things that I write about, which I know we haven't gotten into yet, but it's about like healing and like healing of like our own traumas, because humanity as a collective is very traumatized. And we all are as individuals as well. And so yeah, that connection has always been there, and that love for like people and animals has just always been there.
That's awesome. Yeah, because that kind of brings me to kind of back to the beginning of what I was saying. So, you know, your love for the arts definitely probably comes from your empathic nature, the fact that you can connect and see things that probably others can't. So I was wondering, just like, I mean, do you have siblings as well, or were you the only one in your house? You also have siblings, okay?
Yeah, I have a younger brother.
Okay. Was he experiencing some of the same scrutiny or the push as you were?
Yeah, for sure. He had it a little bit easier in some ways because he was a boy, and like in India that's like preferred. Then I think he had it a little bit harder in other ways because he was a boy. There's like this extra pressure of like you have to like provide or whatever when you grow older. And so yeah, he also had like an inclination for the arts, which also got very smushed out of him.
Interesting. What part of India was this, by the way?
Oh my gosh. So I am born and raised in like a part of India that most people don't know about because it's really like rural. Yeah, it's like
I mean, we're here to celebrate you. This is our podcast, but as you can tell by our like open mouths and we're just here to like learn about you because you have such an interesting story. Like just reading about it has not even like really matched, you know, your true grace in this conversation. So I really do appreciate you. So whatever you feel comfortable talking about, whatever you don't, we can definitely, we're just here.
It's this place called Jharkhand that like, you know, has like some of the highest like illiteracy rates and like gang violence in India. Like half my family was like into gangs. Like it was like pretty intense.
Wow.
So
yeah, I can't even imagine. I can't imagine being in India and in a gang. That's like insane. But yeah, I mean, but I think a lot of what we bring up is to show that we come from humble beginnings. I also come from New York City and the inner city of just going through a whole lot. Caleb always speaks about his humble beginnings as well. You know, you don't even know Caleb's story, but a lot of this is because that radio voice that you heard took a lot of time and effort, just put it that way. Almost years of his life to become as eloquent as he has been. So, you know, we're all here to share these stories with each other. And our viewers know that we're very genuine about who we talk to because everyone we've met have been some sort of unsung hero that hasn't really gotten a chance to really been discovered or, you know, whatever it may be. So we're definitely, I mean, you've obviously done more than enough to get yourself out there as far as marketing your books and your cat cafes and all that other stuff. Like that's a daunting task that even sometimes I feel a little daunted to do, like opening up my own business and stuff. So never feel that those humble beginnings mean much. It means more about how you got there because it wasn't a silver spoon of sorts, you know?
So true.
But I think it's just awesome to kind of come from that space. We had one Indian guest on as well. And I think he's still in India and he's just fighting for Greenpeace like nobody's business. And I think he's actually in a rural place where like there's not a lot going on. So, and he's the most eloquent person we've had on our show. You know, it just shows.
I'm gonna have to find that episode.
For sure, yeah.
We'll send it to you as well.
Yeah, he's actually he had such a great. He's so stoic sometimes, so it's like you're just like he's like you know like in the battle, like he's just like in the heat of it. So I can understand, but you know,
he's so quiet, and
he's super quiet.
He's a great guest.
He's a great guest, but so yeah, I say a lot to say that just like I find it just awesome that you were able to create entrepreneurship in a place that like you know didn't really thrive there, and even if you bring up the other story as you were traveling. The community that you were able to foster these people kind of were joking. They were kind of doubting you low key. Like they were making fun of the fact that you had this large heart, and you're like, you know what, I'm gonna take something and I'm gonna do something with it, and I think that's what's so awesome about your story. And then it goes on even further after that. So just to unpack some more stuff, like as far as the familial structure, how have you come to terms with like, your own sense of parenting? Because I don't know how old you are, but like I often think about like, how would I be as a parent? Because it often alleviates some of the stress that I've had with my own family members and the way that they kind of move in a certain way. So I'm curious to see like how a lot of that is all going to come into your self-discovery and development. But anyway, what made you start writing, I guess, after you made the cat cafes?
Yeah, so I opened the first cat cafe in DC, opened the second cat cafe a year later in LA. Nice. And internally, like I was getting worse, and like the more, basically what I realized now looking back that was happening was that the more successful I was becoming, the more inadequate I felt inside. Because, when we don't feel like we're enough, when we don't feel like we're adequate, and our lives also aren't enough and adequate, everything matches. And when mentally the things you believe about yourself, your reality matches, there's like this sense of understanding, and like I think humans really need to understand, like it needs to all make sense. And so the more successful I got, the less sense everything made to me, because I grew up with a very verbal, in a lot of ways, abusive father. He was physically and verbally abusive. And one of the things he would say to me is like, you're never going to be successful on your own and on like with like the things that you want to do, right? And so, but suddenly I was, and it was becoming bigger and bigger, and it was bigger than my father's success, right? Which like suddenly is like, and so all the like stories that I was fed about myself and how inadequate I was were up. Whereas in the past, they were just buried somewhere because my environment wasn't challenging these beliefs that I had about myself. So they weren't coming up, And so anyway, basically what ended up happening was I started developing really intense mental health issues, like intense depression. Like, yeah, I'd experienced depression until that point, but now it was becoming like I would literally be in my apartment, like all the shades closed, wouldn't get out of bed for days. And I would just stare at the ceiling, and like I'd cancel all my meetings. And then I would only like climb out to like eat like a cold, hard piece of bread from the fridge and then like go back, So like I became very insomniac. Like I started having really trouble sleeping, really bad anxiety. And then in my business, I became really like, and I still actually struggle with this, like very critical and very intense and very like work, and there's nothing else. So now I'm burning everybody else out, because here's the thing, when you think that you're a fluke, which is what I was drowning in, you think that tomorrow you're going to wake up and the fluke is going to get undone, right? Like someone's going to discover that you're a fluke, or the universe is going to figure it out. And like your reality is going to match what it actually should be matching, which is where you're at, which for me was like a very low place. So like I was constantly in this anxiety of like, I'm going to lose everything tomorrow, because I was never supposed to have it in the first place.
Right.
And then when you have that anxiety, at least for me, the way I dealt with it was to do my best to not lose everything tomorrow, which meant to work around the clock constantly to prevent the inevitable doomsday that was coming according to my brain. And so now all of a sudden my employees are crazy overworked, and we still have a very intense hustle culture, which I'm sure comes from like the whole immigrant, all of that. And in some ways it's good, and in other ways it can be damaging.
For sure.
But yeah, and so everyone was really overworked. Nobody felt appreciated because, well, I didn't appreciate myself. So how am I going to appreciate anybody else? Nobody kind of felt seen. And like, so my company had like really high turnover. And then how I started writing was, there was 1 week where 100% of my management and 80% of my employees quit. Just like the same week. And when something like that major happens in your life, you can go two places with it. You can go the first place, and I went the easy route. The first place, I was like, nobody gets how hard it is to be an entrepreneur. I started my company as a 24-year-old. I don't have parents who can financially back me up if this fails. I'm signing commercial leases with like 6 figures with my own personal guarantee, right? Like, nobody gets how hard this is. And like, you know, they just expect way too much from me. But like the finger pointing was going to my employees. The finger pointing was going outside. It wasn't like I had to look at myself. It was just like people were just expecting too much from me.
Right.
And then
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, good. No,
it comes all full circle. Like I was going to interject, but you unpack so much information. I'd rather you just say it a lot. But yeah, it just goes back into this whole aspect of your father's expectations, you know, all this thing coming full circle. Because I wanted to get into the point of like what triggered it for you, because it's almost like the success triggered the depression, which is so ironic. I think a lot of what fuels us sometimes is not even in the right space of mind. If you think about just going back to the the original guys that made the joke about it, you were fueled by rebellion. You're like, I'm going to make this work because they laughed about it, you know? Or your dad's like, you're never going to do this. And you're fueled by rebellion in this thing. And it's like, you're still almost subversive and submissive to these ideals, regardless of which way you take it, because you're accepting that into your own space and your own universe, rather than saying like, damn, what do I want? You know, what does Kanchan want? You know, like that was the last thing you were thinking about. There was no I in any of that. It was just like, you think I'm not going to do this? I'm going to prove you wrong. And that's just as bad as looking for love outside of yourself, which is something I've experienced. So it's music to my ears when I hear you talking, because when I think about, you know, just having the community to be like, yo, I'm about to like get this real estate property or like whatever, like it's not there. Like regardless of where it's, you know, parents or whatever. Kayla's been a huge support as far as us building this business, but I definitely feel you there. Like it can become very lonely because we have these expectations on ourselves that we've taken on from other people. And my biggest healing has been just like letting all that stuff go and really just figuring out what I wanted to do. The other aspect of what I was going to say is your business in and of itself wasn't something that you had been learning earlier about, which was a social business. There was people that were happy. You made people happy, but you weren't happy inside, which is so interesting to think about. It's like going to Disneyland and like seeing Walt Disney just like frozen and upset, which he probably is. But I think a lot of that is very interesting to come full circle, like about you being able to kind of shatter these glass ceilings that other people had projected not only onto you, but onto themselves. Because if you look at your dad's perspective, outside of it just being like this dogmatic, you know, very Indian culture thing, it was a man and someone that was someone's son that felt like they needed to achieve something. So this level of expectation, especially where you're from, is a given. We feel like we have never been worth anything because this is where we started. And we're worth so much more than where we began, you know? So I think that you've done a phenomenal job for sure, just explaining all that stuff. I just wanted to like kind of tag on to that a little bit.
Yeah, and to reflect back on something you said, you know, like for me, the Cat Cafe came from like a place of like wanting to create that, because I've loved animals my whole life. I was like, I want to like help these animals, but what happened is the same pattern of not enough, because once we started helping animals, it was like, okay, sure, we got like 200 cats adopted this year, but another 1,000 were euthanized in DC. So like, what's the point, right? And so like, again, and that's what I mean about like patterns that we have, because it almost was like, unless I saved, even if I saved every cat in the world, I bet the next story would become, in fact, I know myself, and I know the next story would become, yeah, but there's like, how many ever millions of species of animals, and like you didn't save them, so what's the point?
You didn't save any dogs. You gotta do it again. Reincarnation.
Or like, exactly. It's just like you're worthless, you know, like that's the story I kept coming back to, is like what I'm doing is actually worthless and I am worthless. And I just couldn't get away from that. And the thing is like, the more it felt like other people saw the worth in it, the more fraudulent I felt. Because if I feel worthless and all I have around me is like my family telling me that I'm worthless, it's at least making sense. But suddenly I have this successful business and people are like, oh my God, there's so much value to what you're doing. There's so much worth in what you're doing. And then all of a sudden you start, like, for me, it was like the added anxiety of like, they're going to discover I'm a fraud, because at least before I believed I was worthless and that was the external validation. So there's no fraudulent activity going on there. Right. And like what really like triggered for me the anxiety like that went through the roof was feeling like I was a fraud and like my success was a fluke. And then this feeling of like, now I need to do my best to like not
like covering it up. Yeah, you're like covering up your light because you're like, this isn't real. Like none of this is real. You know, I think that's so funny that I think a lot of great people go through imposter syndrome. I mean, would you say that, Caleb? Did you hear me?
Oh, definitely. In fact, it's a. Yeah. I got you. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It definitely. In fact, I actually read a book once that taught how it's very common for a lot of our celebrities today to have imposter syndrome. People that maybe are more on the successful side, maybe popular side, that there's a very good chance that they may have that. And we actually have a couple comments, and Kaylee says imposter syndrome is so real. And I think it's something that we regular civilized human beings go through a lot more than we realize. I think it's a lot more common than recognized in our society. As we've noticed, our society is quite screwed up in a variety of ways. And then we also have another comment from Twitch, from Ghost Hand 246. The thing about rebellious spirit is that it tends to burn bright and fast. We need more than that in long term, but it works as a wake-up call to start something. I really like that. I thought that was
I like that
very
too.
well said.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. For sure, Ghost Hand. That was awesome. Yeah, that means a lot. You know, I appreciate them even like taking the taglines off of what I said. Like that means a lot because sometimes that it's almost like that rebellious spirit was what you needed when you were in that dark place, but you couldn't rely on it anymore because it was like you broke everyone's barriers. So it's like, and I'm an Olympic champion, but now I have to fight myself. You know, it's like it's hard to explain.
You don't
it's
feel like you are. You know, you.
Well, that's
feel
the whole
like,
thing, right?
Yeah, you feel like it's this like interesting split thing where a part of you is breaking the barriers and a part of you feels even more trapped than before. Right. And that was what was happening for me. And how writing came into play was that, so when like later on that same week when everyone quit, well, 80% of people quit, I kind of had this conversation with my mentor at the time. And she said to me that, you know, I've been thinking about bringing this up with you because a lot of the things you've said to me about how you feel about yourself and your business, I've just gone like, okay, she's not seeing anything clearly. And I've been thinking about telling you that you need to do therapy, but I didn't know if it was in my place to kind of say that. And she was like, I really just think that she's like, you know, given what happened and given kind of everything, like therapy would probably really help you. And so then I started therapy, and until that point I hadn't, this is 26 or 27, somewhere around there. Until that point I hadn't done any therapy and I hadn't done any kind of self-work. And I started therapy and self-work, and all of a sudden I used to think I was a robot. I was like, who I am today and who I was like at this point in my life that I'm talking about are like not night and day. They're like solar systems apart. It's like, it's intense.
So you were very apathetic in a sense?
Very.
Yeah.
Like very apathetic, very judgmental and critical and like intense, you know?
So you didn't allow, because this all comes back because even when you tell stories of your youth and just my little bit of therapy, because I'm a big proponent of doing therapy, especially nowadays, especially with childhood stuff. Do you have moments in your childhood that you can remember of like joy and happiness and stuff like that? Or do you only remember your childhood as like very like disciplined?
Well, I didn't remember my childhood at all when I started therapy. My childhood was one giant black screen. And when people talked about their childhoods and they were like, what was your favorite? I was like, who the fuck remembers this stuff? Like, I just thought like, because I didn't remember anything. And I learned later in therapy that we repress stuff.
Precisely.
Yeah. And for people who've had very traumatic childhoods, like they have that, like the black screen is like a thing that they have. So Yeah, so that was how it was for me, and I didn't feel emotions. Like when I started therapy, I told my therapist, she was like, "How do you feel?" I was like, "What does that even mean?" You know? And so I was just not like I didn't feel at all. And in therapy was when like through therapy that I started feeling, and that's when I started
Oof.
writing because I
Yeah.
had it was like a dam was broken almost, and there's like this flood of emotions. And the only way I knew how to survive it and process it all was to write. And I'd never written poetry. Like, I still remember the first day I wrote a poem. I was literally in my bathroom. I was crying on the floor dramatically. I'm not sure why I was crying on the floor, but like I just was.
Right. It
And
happened.
I pulled out my journal to like write something, just write, like I journaled. So like I just thought I was going to write about like how I felt, and out came like a perfect poem start to finish, 2 pages. And I was like, I remember being distracted from my own pain and looking at my journal and going, like, what is happening? Because I'd never written a poem. And
Right.
I was like, and then it didn't stop. Like it just kept going. Like 2 weeks later, I had like 200 like suddenly I became this like ridiculous poet. And people who were reading my poetry were like, dude, this is really good. So it wasn't like
Right.
whatever. They're like, you need to publish these. And so that's when I started writing, and writing, the power of writing just astounds me. And, and I used to think writing was worthless. It took me 2 years to even embrace being a writer. I was fighting it. Like I would have poems coming to me. I would have like stuff coming, and I would refuse to write it. And I'd be
Wow.
like, no, go away. Because
That's
I thought
crazy.
it was, yeah. Because my coming back to my father and his very intense beliefs that like
You believed it.
big time. I like drank the
Yeah.
Kool-Aid like to a degree
Yeah.
that I like didn't know what anything but the Kool-Aid tasted like, you know? And so
Right.
I was rejecting anything else. And it
Right.
took me a long time to even to write. And, even when I talk about my book, I feel like the process of putting that book together was 90% resistance
Right.
and like fighting it, and 10% actually writing the book, because there was a big part of me that did not want to be an artist because I already felt so worthless. And artists, according to my father, was like, were that times a million worthless. And I didn't think I could like stay alive if I felt even like an ounce more worthless and
Right.
insignificant than I felt. But yeah, that's kind of how I started writing, though.
That's beautiful. That's a great story.
Mhm.
And I find it so interesting that like all this dogma. I don't know what your father's father taught him in that sense, but it wasn't that many artists around you where you guys were living in India, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if it was like that big of a deal, then we would have ended up all in the same place, right? But
Mm-hmm.
I do think that it means a lot for you to break through those things that you've been able to program yourself in. And I think the words that kept coming up besides the imposter syndrome was a bit of an ego death. And I think we
Mhm.
constantly go through these things, where we have a certain idea of what our identity is, and we're able to break past it. Like Caleb took a great idea to name this episode as Perseverance. I do think a lot of this is your stories, like as far as like the easy stuff that people are like, I could never do that. You did that. You did that immediately at 24. So you persevered through that. You persevered through all that other stuff. And it was like this final step, or maybe it's just because it's closer to where we are now in our current day. This final step that we've done to kind of like persevere through yourself and what you thought of yourself, and allowing that to get past, like, you're breaking these glass ceilings about yourself. And that's something that maybe that's what you were supposed to bring to the generation, like this higher purpose that you keep saying that you feel that you want to do. It's probably all of the arms that you've been able to kind of reach out to, and maybe even be able to reach back and help your brother to be more creative, and to your parents, like, yo, go paint, like go do something with all of that negative energy, like go do something. It just matters now, especially since you're like, I've already proven to be successful, so what else could I be doing wrong? Everything must be up from here. But as far as this narrative too, I wanted to kind of highlight to especially anyone in our audience that definitely has been feeling like this. I'm always a big proponent of mental health and self-help and discovery and stuff like that. So, if anyone ever has these false narratives about themselves. We have an example right here to say that even in the midst of success, in the height of success, she was able to kind of still perpetuate, like, I'm not enough. And I often feel like that. Like, Caleb picks me up all the time. Like, and I think, like, I always explain to people that healthy community is great. And just someone reading your poem and being like, that's amazing. But the difference between this and you doing the Cat Cafe was you thought it was amazing as well. You looked at it and you were like, this is kind of great. And then you shared it, you know? And that's kind of what I want to be able to do. Like, a lot of times people want the talent and the money. But if you have the talent, you know, that stuff is infinite. Like, you're going to provide infinite joy, infinite, like, sometimes sadness, because some of our poems are really sad, but just whatever. It's creativity. And it's not as stoic as numbers. So it's funny that you were apathetic, got into finance, understood business completely, because they're kind of like on that wave anyway. They're like emotions. We don't use those. Yeah. And I've learned both sides. So I definitely feel where you're coming from, where, like, you know, whether it be the stock market or just the fundamentals of real estate or business or different LLCs. I guess Caleb is going to be back soon. You know, whatever it may be, like, that stuff can be very stagnating, you know, emotionally and spiritually. So as you kind of gone through your emotional aspect, where did you kind of end up throughout your spiritual path? Like, how did that kind of come about? Or you can answer the question of, how have you been entertaining your inner child?
Yeah. Yeah. So as I started kind of opening up to my emotions, you know, I started opening up to myself, right? To my heart, to like who I really am, which was something I was completely closed off to. And as soon as I started doing that, I felt like I started kind of having a lot of spiritual experiences and a lot of just spiritual breakthroughs and awakenings, because it was when we really feel our hearts, if we are lucky enough to do that, and you know, we feel how powerful and big and brilliant we are, like that kind of stuff, that has the power to break those stories, because you can actually feel within you who you truly are. And even if it's like a second, right? Because it's not like I feel it all the time, but even if it's like you sat in meditation for 2 minutes and felt that, the power of that is more than the power of all these like stories that you've heard about who you are. So I just kind of started having, and I think you know, my book is called Dear Me, I Love You. And I think that like self-love is like the greatest kind of form of spiritual connection we can have with ourselves, because it's recognizing how brilliant and beautiful we are as beings, as just humans, you know? And so, yeah, when I started kind of like opening up to my heart and my own emotions and like what was truly inside me, that in itself was a spiritual journey. Because what's inside us, I think, like what's outside us is more of a material journey, whereas what's inside us is more of a spiritual journey. And then you know, my book goes into actually, so my book is my healing story. And when I wrote my book, one thing that I noticed was, well, first of all, I wrote my book is like no page in my book was written to write a book. It's my journal entries strung together to tell a story. So it's like poetry, prose, conversations with my therapist, but like literally we took like 2,500 pages and somehow distilled it to 314, which is just absurd, to tell like my story of healing, which has inner child work. It has like all these other kind of forms of healing that I did, because thank you. Because when I was healing, I found books that talked about the work, the self-work and the healing, but I didn't find books that actually showed what the journey looked like. Like there's a difference between saying like, feel your pain versus like, this is what pain feels like through like a song or a poem. And to me, the latter is way more powerful and way more helpful, because it actually is not an intellectual thing. Because feel your pain is more of an intellectual, like whatever. Whereas like
think about it, and and do all this other, I got you.
Yeah, and so what I kind of like, what I wanted to do in my book was to show the journey of what it is actually feels like. Like my book is like emotions, like it's just one long emotional kind of read. Caleb. and it just kind of goes, like it never really stops emotionally. And that's what I didn't feel like I had when I was doing my healing journey. Was I just had preaching of like, go do the work. I didn't have like, here's what it looks like to do the work. That was like a form of catharsis and a form of just like helping me understand my own journey, you know? And so yeah, like, with my inner child, to answer your question, we do a lot of like play dates. We haven't done any recently. We got to do more. This is everything.
Now you know.
Yeah.
I think that's so interesting too, just coming from your background, because I often do incorporate like all sorts of mysticism and religions all into one. So coupled with just the ideas of your Indian ancestry, whether it be just like the deep spiritual aspects that we gather from that, and to the watered down perspectives that have gone to California as far as like new age type of stuff. It's just interesting to see kind of what you've landed upon in this whole journey for sure. But what was I gonna say? I think that he's gone again. I think it's super awesome that you've been able to kind of like do this in a visceral way. I do think that a lot of these self-help books, a lot of these teachers and gurus, and I've even actually had some relationships with people that are kind of on that wave as well. I often felt still like it was very dogmatic, and I never could achieve it. Like it never felt like it was tangible until I was able to be so separate from everyone, so destitute, so depressed, that I was like, okay, I can only call on some sort of higher power. I can only break past these narratives about myself and make a change, make a difference. I do feel like having that journey, and also the continued process. Anybody that checks out our book, definitely check out our book as well. Anyone that's listening, but think about it. Anybody that's telling you like you got to do the healing process, they're still on their process as well. And that's what I've learned also, because we've had Buddhist teachers on, we've had everyone here, and everyone's still like working through something with themselves, whatever it may be, because our spirits are infinite, but these bodies are limited. So you're constantly coupling with these, these ideals of what the ideal of who I should be fully. Like you're like, I need to save the world. I need to save every cat like right now. If I don't do this tomorrow, it's a problem, like, so I understand that. But with that healthy amount of perfectionism comes a lot of gratefulness. And I think that's another thing I wanted to kind of say is like, if anyone else could express that, you have to be grateful for each step that you've taken. And I often tell Caleb, like specifically, like when we make small jumps, we celebrate that as if it's like Cinco de Mayo, man. Like, like we go in, because that matters. That all those little things matter at the end of the day. Like it really does. So
I've got to celebrate more. Thank you for the reminder.
That's what I was gonna say. Yeah, it definitely has helped me along my journey for sure. Like little stuff, like honestly, I was feeling really down today, and I got out of bed. Like I had to start there, because the shades and everything. It's like it's almost like the depression's just like, all right, let me set the mood. Like, it's like who in the world would like know? Like, okay, I'm gonna eat as little as I can. I'm gonna sleep as little as I can, and I'm gonna make everything dark. Like, obviously, no one's consciously thinking about that when they're going through it. But I've been there. But it's so funny. When you're not doing it, you're like, oh, wow, these were habits that I was going out of my way to make this the worst possible feeling because that's how I felt inside, So it's very interesting. I think we have some comments, right? Did Ghost Hand say some fun stuff? What was that, Kayla? Can you click it? You say something crazy?
I can't see anything. I can't see anything.
I can read it for you.
For the comments. Okay. But I was also gonna say.
Go ahead. I
was also going to say with that, the celebrating more and everything. I think something that I've really tried to do over the past year or two. So I actually read something somewhere, and then I had a great conversation with someone one time, someone very close to me, and we kind of decided that we have to not only celebrate more, but we have to recognize the small things in life. Right? Because the small things make up the big things, right? The small things is what continuing to make the world go around, right? That's what's bringing the world on the earth on this axis rotating constantly every single day. And so it's the small things that go such a long way. And if we can recognize those small things and embrace them and we, really just kind of take them in. It doesn't have to be every small thing, doesn't have to be every single day. It's simply just allowing yourself to recognize the small things in life. Maybe it's someone opening a door for you, maybe it's someone just sending you a text saying, hey, hope you're doing well today. Maybe it's as small as paying for the person behind you in line, whatever it may be. I think it's those small things that really go a long way. It's the little celebrations, it's the little things that make us happy more than we could ever imagine. And I have tried my absolute darndest bestest to make sure that I live my life in that manner to every single day ever since then, to make it to where, we celebrate more, we appreciate the small things, and we recognize, especially in a global pandemic, that we are more connected more than we ever thought we would be. And we are in a time where we never, ever, ever imagined we would be in this time, right? I remember the first month of the pandemic, I honestly thought I was in a movie, right? I thought I was in a movie. I think most of us did. I was thinking, am I in some weird apocalyptic video game or something? But here we are. Over a year later, and we're still going. We're still trying to persevere. And things have been difficult. We've lost so many lives. And yet here we are, still going forth. And then I just want to say I appreciate both of you for what you've done and the success that you've made and the perseverance that you have both been able to accomplish and get to this point. I appreciate myself being able to defy the odds. And I think, and I mean that in the most sincere way, because in reality, we do have to appreciate ourselves at times. And I have also, I think, as many of us, struggled with mental health. And I think realizing that getting to where we are today is a small feat that we should be thankful for.
Mm-hmm.
As a long rant, but
no, that was great.
But I think it was needed for the show.
I think so too, man. I really appreciate you for saying that. I mean,
yeah, that was great.
I mean, all your words are needed for the show, Caleb. there'd be no show without you. Funny, man. But I think it's super awesome because I was having this conversation about success, and people often look at the tip of the iceberg, and I think again, Kanchan was definitely like exactly right on that. Like, people just saw the successful person that like didn't let anything stop her, this super feminist from India, and you're like, inside I'm going through it. Can somebody just give me a hug? Like,
yeah. One of the actually most helpful things my mentor once said to me was, she said, because I told her, I was like, I just feel like everyone expects so much from me. And she was like, well, first of all, you're in a very different reality than what you grew up in. Like, the people that are your employees, the people who you work for, they didn't go through what you went through. So they're not even coming from that place. And so, they're not seeing a heartbroken little girl from India who's terrified she's going to be poor again and be left on the streets. They're seeing a successful business owner who is, fabulous and whatever else. And you're coming from a heartbroken little girl place because you have to heal that, but that's not where everybody else is coming from. And so it was just one of the most helpful things I'd heard, because it helped me understand why there was such a gap between the way I saw myself and the way other people did. Because to your point, they see the tip of the iceberg. They don't see the part that's underneath. Whereas that's what we see and we feel. And so that's what's informing our opinions about ourselves and where we're coming from. And I think, Tariq, you're on mute.
So true. Yeah, I think so too. You're on mute again.
You hear me now?
No. Okay.
Yeah.
Good. No, that I think there's something to that, because I kind of also come from a bit of a background like that, coming from not the strongest, but allowing my intellect to get me to where I had to go. And I was around people that were families were all Fortune 500, and they just had not a care in the world. And I do think that there's part of that has propulsed me to be, amazingly great, because that's all they know. All they know is greatness and success and everything. Like that's part of that. So you got a chance to take a part of that with you. But it's different when you have this, like you said, this backstory that's kind of just they don't have. Like it's almost easier to have that black screen, but you know what they had was their childhood comparatively to yours. They had these happy memories, and all you had was this black screen. So it's like it's kind of this weird dichotomy. And I definitely experienced it. There was parts of me when I was in high school where I was like, oh my God, we're like so similar, and I could just connect with these people on a deep level. But I also felt like I was hiding a lot of myself because they just wouldn't get it. You know, they just wouldn't understand anything about what I was coming from or what it was. So, Ghost Hand is giving us some good facts. Let's hit him up before. Thanks for being a good fan off of Twitch, man. Ghost Hand 246 says, in regards to imposter syndrome, it is almost like okay, there we go. Now you can see it. Oh, that's the second one. But we can read that one too. Shutting off emotionally is quite common during periods of hardship, specifically during teenage years. When I was in high school, I essentially shut off and thought that was the only way to survive. Only with therapy, I learned to open up. So shout out to therapy. Shout out to people learning about their flaws and moving forward. And, you know, we can all be like Kanchan and just like, you know, write something from it or like make something from it. Some people go to art. Some people do music. Caleb does some music and stuff with his stuff.
Well,
really awesome. Sure.
You know something I will say, and I think kind of goes back to this term perseverance, and something, Kanchan, that you might recognize now, that every show I always title the episode for a very particular reason. I do my research before I pick pick something, and every time I pick the show title, it's always the word that comes to me the most when looking into the guests that we're about to have on the show, when talking to them, you know, researching, you know, through their bio, all that stuff. And every time I read your bio, I looked at your website, whatever it may be, I thought perseverance.
Interesting.
I thought this word. And you know what? I think this word resonates even more so to more of us in today's society, and especially in some of the younger generations in the world, a lot more than we recognize. And I think in the arts, especially, perseverance is maybe one of the most resilient and underrated words there is at the moment. And so looking at the arts and looking at the ways, kind of the ways that Ghost Hand even mentioned, how with therapy allowed them to open up, right? And how therapy allowed them to kind of discover a new part of their identity and a new part of themselves and everything. And I feel like, and maybe this is just me with my experiences, but I feel like writing in particular and the arts in general is a great way to allow us to open up. And now, as Kanchan kind of mentioned, like here we are with writing, with poetry, allowing her to open up, right? I know Tarek and myself also write poetry, and that allows us to kind of open up and discover more of ourselves. I mean, sitting right next to me is a book of so many details and so many words that describes the pain that I've been in, the whatever it may be, the feelings, the emotions that I'm feeling at any point of any given day. And I feel when it comes to writing, when it comes to this term perseverance, it's allowing us to open up in different ways. It's allowing us to express ourselves in different ways. And you know, some of our ancestors didn't necessarily always have that either. And I think we're very fortunate in the regards of looking at it and realizing that we have so many ways to open up. We have therapists to help us and mentors to help us and guide us. And you know, I know we've talked about before, but Tarek is someone who's really helped me throughout discovering more of myself, throughout discovering just being a better person, throughout being a better podcaster, and allowing me to open up more in my own poetry as well. And without him, I don't even want to know, you know, where I'd be. And I think it's really important. And without the show, I know that Tarek and myself don't know where we would be without it. And so,
we literally just started this in August. So literally August 2020 for sure. Yeah. This has been our journey since. We've just been growing, man. It's funny because I think Caleb does more promos now, and that's been really awesome. I've been like seeing him do his promos and like go outside. It's been really awesome just to see you like step out and do that. I used to do all the promos. I still do, but I see that Caleb has been stepping out, and I wanted to appreciate that. So shout out to you, man. I think someone said my comment, shout out to therapy. That's literally a tattoo worthy. That's pretty funny.
Yeah, Kaylee said, shout out to therapy. That's tattoo worthy.
That's so funny. That's so funny.
I love that.
It's definitely worth it. But no, it definitely helps a lot. You know, I don't mean to have you on too long, but I was curious, like, were you ever nervous to tell your story or to write it?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, it's still it's still I'm terrified of it.
Really?
Because with my book, it's
Mhm.
like I said, it's my journal, and like nothing I wrote in that in there was written like, oh, other people are gonna read this.
Right.
Nothing. It was written as like I'm expressing myself and my pain, and so it's in my like raw, most stripped down essence, and so that's a deeply vulnerable thing to share and to put out there. And we just delayed our book launch. It was supposed our book launch. Who's our my book launch? It was supposed to be, and now it's going to be in August. And I can tell that like a lot of my own fears are what have, and I'm giving myself time to work through them. I'm not like pushing myself and saying, which was my first instinct, was like, just push yourself, which is what I've done my whole life. And I was like, actually, you know what? If I need another month to get okay with like the anxiety of like, people are going to read this and it's intense and it's me at my most raw and honest and vulnerable, then I'm going to give myself that month. Like I'm going to give myself that time before I put this out there, because it's a really big thing to put out there. So yeah, it's been a struggle, and it still is a struggle.
That's dope. I mean, I think that's something to that. I think just to bring up my little anecdote about just being at the Apollo and stuff, and I know a lot of artists that have pushed themselves to just go and do it, you know, and they did it afraid. But I also think there's something healthy to just allowing yourself to be present with what's happening in life. We're such, you know, we're always on go, you know, with this idea of capitalism. We're always on some like, okay, this book's got to get out.
Simulated human beings.
Right? You know, what's wrong with like taking some time, grounding yourself, realizing that once you're able to release this and publish this, it should, you know, can no longer really affect you. It becomes everyone's story. And what I've learned as well, with something that's that deep, you'd be surprised that because you've repressed it so deep, you never thought anybody would want to see the light of it. But when you share these stories, people are like, wow, now I can kind of share my truth. Like my dad used to beat me every time I didn't do well on a math test, and I didn't want to tell anybody that, you know? So it's like, it matters because you're courageous enough to press past yourself. Someone else will be able to actually heal from it. And I think that's kind of the point. So, you know, it might be some backlash, it might be some family backlash, who knows? But at the end of the day, we have to know that like there was a reason why you're able to write this. And I think what's healthy about your writing in that space was that you didn't think anybody was going to see it, because you probably would have edited it. You probably would have written something to someone else's standards. And you had only your standards in that moment. And I think that's what matters. That's what's true. That's what's going to remain. You know, that's who you're going to be with for the longest.
That's what's
you know, so.
And that's
sure. Yeah, and that's what's really important.
Oh, sorry. What were we saying? I thought, I don't know, it delayed a little bit for me.
Caleb and I are in like you speak match.
Right.
I was saying it's what's most true to me too. That's all. That it was written nice. From that place. Yeah, go ahead, Caleb. You were saying.
No, I was just saying that, and that's what's really important too. You know, and I think.
But what I was gonna say was, do you want to revisit my other question as we kind of wrap this all up? So, like, dealing with all the traumas, dealing with all this stuff. We still have one big question at the end that I always ask, but how would you be as a parent? What would you say, since you have spoken about your inner child? How do you think that you would correct some of the things? Not correct, that's the wrong way to describe it. How would you be as a parent? That's the best way to describe.
Yeah.
I apologize for that.
So good. You are talking to somebody who never wants to be a parent, but
You never want to be a parent. Okay,
no,
I should have asked that first.
but I do
Not
know
even
how
cat
I
sitting?
would be as a parent. What'd you say, Terry?
It's not even cat sitting. No.
A cat. I'll take cat parent. I can talk about how I'd be as a cat parent. No, I'm kidding. I think that in working with my own inner child, and I don't like to say it like working with my own inner child because it almost sounds a little bit too textbook. And then it just makes that part of me feel like it's an assignment or feel like it's whatever. So I always say like younger versions of me and child parts of me.
True.
They're like living, breathing parts in me, in all of us,
Mm-hmm.
And so what I've kind of learned, like my greatest pains, I was molested at a very young age, from a very young age. I've gone through like physical beatings and sexual assaults and all of that. Yet the hardest thing for me to overcome has been my father's disappointment and disapproval, not being molested, and I'm not saying that's true for all trauma. I'm just saying what I learned, from it is that my deepest need was to be seen and to be loved and to be appreciated and to be heard, and like not having that from my parents left a deeper hole than some of these other very intense events that happened from people who weren't my parents. Because as children, our parents are our gods. Like they are the all-knowing, all kind of whatever being. So if they don't see us, if they don't understand us, if they don't love us, if they don't feel we're worthy, then exactly. It's very crushing. I think a lot of people who we lose to suicide or depression, like just never felt seen or heard and never felt like truly safe being themselves. And the only place, like it's so crushing and it's so debilitating as a feeling that the only thing we can do to survive is to numb it, And so to answer your question of how I would be as a parent is like, no matter who my child is, to really see them and to really love them for who they are and to really like hear what they have to say. And to, and that's not to say there are no boundaries. That's not to say that there are no like rules or like what's okay and what's not okay, but like everything that they're seeing is valid, who they are is valid, and who they are is worthy, and making sure that they're enough, and making sure that they really feel that, because we can tell a child but if they don't feel that from you, if it's like you're worthy, but you're just saying that, it's like
it's just some textbook crap. Like you think your inner child is like, oh, inner child? Like no, they're like, remember that time something happened when we were 7 years old? Like that's how it's gonna, interact with you. So I feel that like it's definitely humbling for sure.
Yeah, we're like conscious feeling beings, and we feel the truth, and children really feel the truth. And so to really like making them feel seen and heard and loved and enough, however, whatever form that takes, because it'll depend on each child, but like whatever form that takes is what I would make sure I did as a parent, because I know that the biggest holes in me that I'm still trying to heal and to fill came from that.
Mm-hmm. I got that. I get that for sure. Yeah, that means a lot. So I guess that brings us to like our last question. How would you identify yourself? Like that's usually what we usually end our whole thing around.
Yeah, I mean, that one, there's so many layers, or like it's a very multi-dimensional question. I think if I had to like pick just one thing, I would just say like,
what do you like about yourself, I guess would be the best place to start. Yeah.
Right. Like, I see myself as an artist, as an entrepreneur, as just a divine being, period. And there are times when I see myself as none of those, and that's totally valid too, because there are parts of me who feel that way as well. but yeah, as an artist, as an entrepreneur, as a humanitarian, as an environmentalist, as somebody who is like team humanity and team the planet and team animals, and yeah, a divine being is like, if I had to just pick one thing, that's how I would put it.
Nice. That was amazing. Kudos to her for that. Shout out to that one for sure. That was a beautiful, yeah, right? No, I think that was a great way to do it. And also, I wanted to say, like, you're very loving, as much as that you probably feel like you're still on that path of learning how to love and stuff. But I definitely feel it. I'm sure one day we'll read your poems. We'll probably read it on here. I was going to read you one, but our hour is ending, so you guys are going to get that demographic.
You have to send me.
Do it.
You guys have to send me some of your poetry.
Yeah, we'll do it. We'll do like a whole segment on poetry.
Oh my
we'll do a whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
In the books. I have it written down.
It's in the books now. It's going in the the master calendar.
Love it.
Yeah, that's super awesome. Did we get all the comments? All the wonderful people that were shouting out with us? Cool.
I think so too.
I think Ghost Hand had some more to say. Yeah. Definitely keep following us every Wednesday, Ghost Hand. We appreciate you for coming through. You know, Twitch, Facebook, all you guys, anybody that's watching this on YouTube. It's been a really, really wonderful show, of course. It's been healing and invigorating. We definitely have to get up with you and figure out how you got all these crazy business loans and all this other stuff. So we love you to come back on the show. But I think this was exactly what needed to be talked about today, for sure. And on this moon in Sagittarius, as we're hopping and jumping through all of our obstacles and hurdles, I think it's healthy to be happy about your low moments as well as your high. And I think that's kind of what I gathered from it. And that's something that I wanted to kind of end off with too. I was having this conversation with someone about gardens and like watering the right plant in the garden. I don't know if you ever heard that like particular expression before, but I've also heard this whole thing, like you can have weeds in your garden as well while you're growing this big tree. So I tend to focus on the more positive things in life. And I realized that there's like, you know, I got a little like shrubbery of just straight negativity over here, but I have a tree of knowledge and I'm planting more trees of much more joy and, oh, wow, inspiration and ambition. So for me, it's like the entire garden can't be filled up with that negativity, but whatever you focus on, you'll naturally attract. So that's kind of what we were talking about before. So definitely try to focus on some positivity, but if you have those low moments, express them, let them out. They're probably the best fuel for poetry. I've written my best poetry when it's raining outside. Sometimes I'll just go out when it's raining, by the way. I'm missing one right now. But just to write.
I like going out when it's raining. It's like something like magical about it.
It is. It definitely is. Honestly, I feel like it has something to do with the data.
So magical.
Like when you're in the shower, but
yeah.
Not get too scientific, but.
You know, that's actually accurate. I actually have heard that before. And I have heard scientists say that they actually say they say it does depend on the individual, but there's been research that will say that some individuals will feel more connected or feel more kind of at ease when there is certain weather or maybe certain things around them. One thing being like in the shower or taking a bath. A lot of individuals have a lot of inspiration, especially creative individuals. Also, when it's raining, not even, you know, maybe a storm, when it's raining is a very common thing. Also, when it's snowing out is a very common thing because maybe you're cooped up inside or it's this change, right? This change of weather occurring outside. Even if you go outside, it's something different from the norm. And so they say that actually it's like the waves and how it hits you. Somehow it's different. Not every individual reacts that way, but it's really interesting.
No, I was laughing towards the end because you sounded like a super surfer dude at the end. You're like, it's really just the waves. Because what I was going to ask, I was like, what happens if you live in California? Like,
I know, you never get rain.
It's just the waves, man. You know, like the waves come in, they go out. It's just like we're out here.
You just go to the ocean and pretend it's rain.
Just splash.
Yeah, just pretend.
Yeah, it's like I can't. I have writer's block. But yeah, that's what I do love about New York. I do love the seasonal changes for that particular reason. I always feel creative when I'm here. The city is just like exhilarating and like doing all sorts of fun stuff. So, we never asked where you hailing from. Are you in Cali?
Yeah, I'm in LA.
That's what I thought.
Cool.
So yeah, so you don't. Where do you get your inspiration from?
Oh my gosh, definitely my emotions. Like I have to be feeling something, and then it's everywhere, And it's like both positive and negative. Like I've written a lot of poems about just beauty and love and all of that, and then pain and all of it. Yeah, it's my feelings.
Got towards like a little emo towards the end. You're like, little darkness. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with a little darkness. Anyway, so yeah. So without further ado, man, you want to do the thing? So this was the joke that I was saying earlier. I haven't come up with a good word for it, but for literally 30 episodes, I'd go, Caleb, do the thing. And like, just people know that he's gonna do that radio voice, and he's gonna swoon the people. He's gonna show them where to follow.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to hear it again.
I think a good word for it is the outro.
It's the outro. The outro.
The thing sounds better though.
The outro.
Yeah, the outro. Have a shirt. Do the thing.
Yeah.
Do the thing. Well, I will do the thing, and I want to thank everyone for listening to the Identity Podcast, for watching the Identity Podcast. As always, of course, every single Wednesday at 7:15 p.m. Eastern Time. That's right. You can watch us live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch, all via the Identity Podcast. Of course, Wednesdays at 7:15 p.m. Eastern Time. And, of course, you can check out the Identity Podcast on all streaming platforms, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And you can follow us on all social media platforms, including our TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. And if you love the Identity Podcast and want to sponsor us, well, guess what? You can. All you have to do is email us at press@findyourdnyc.com, and we'll get back to you with more details on that matter. Of course, May is Mental Health Awareness Month, so we would, at the end of the month, we would like to focus on that, and I feel like the show has been a great way to be able to touch on that as well. And of course, the Identity Podcast is here for anyone who ever needs a friend, ever just needs a voice, needs someone. We are here for you. Feel free to always message us, email us, whatever it may be, or simply if you ever want to just hop on the show, let's talk, right? Let's have some fun, and stuff like that. And of course, mental health is real, and it is okay to not be okay. I would like to say that. That's something recently I've had to recognize and realize myself, that it is okay to not be okay. And there are difficult periods of time for us, but we can make it through. And so I have the show to thank for that, really. And, of course, happy Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month as well. It's been really cool to see all the amazing tributes that have happened throughout kind of the world and throughout social media and such like that for this month. So very exciting stuff with that. But, of course, you've been listening and watching the Identity Podcast. I'm Caleb, one of your co-hosts, along with my fellow and lovely co-host, Tarek. Every single week we are here having guests on the show, inviting them on, and being able to discover their identity, allow them to discover ours, and of course to be able to just continue to talk about this incredible term called identity, this ever flourishing and changing term that's constantly growing no matter what. And it's beautiful, right? It's absolutely beautiful. So we've been here for Perseverance, episode 42 of the Identity Podcast, featuring Kanchan Singh. She's been an absolute joy to be able to discover, to listen, to have her. So thank you for coming on the show. Since from the bottoms of our hearts, we're so grateful to have had you on the show. It's been absolutely great. I've written down so many things.
I know, she really helped me out.
I'm going to save it.
Sure. Thank you for having me. You guys are, and thank you for all the kind compliments. This is amazing. I'm like, keep them coming. I'm kidding. I'll hang out. tell me how great I am. Just kidding. No. It's been awesome to be on here and talk with you guys.
Sweet. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. We really do appreciate it, and of course, I mean, what we're telling you is simply the truth and how we see it. And so thank you again for coming onto the show and allowing us to discover more of your identity, to hear about the cat cafes. Unfortunately, I will have to see them from afar. AKA
oh yeah,
allergic.
That's right. You're super
but it's an amazing idea. I just cannot wait to hear more about it and see more of where you go with that. And of course, congratulations on the soon-to-be book launch. Very exciting stuff. I have already pre-ordered.
Our anniversary is
that during the show. Yeah, August. Yeah. So I'm excited for that. I think it'll be great. But of course, check our debut book, Dear Me, I Love You, coming soon in August, the book launch. Very exciting stuff there. Check out the cat cafes if you are in the DC and LA area with Crumbs and Whiskers cat cafes. And of course, the Identity podcast. Check us out every single Wednesday. So next show, next week, June 2nd, featuring Jill Devine, a radio and podcast personality.
Wow.
Check her out. We're very excited. That one will be titled Real Talk. So it'll be fun to have someone else who kind of is big into podcasting and everything with us to be able to talk to, and maybe another fellow radio voice, right? Cannot wait. But of course, check out the Identity podcast every single week. We're so grateful for you all. Thanks as always. Stay groovy. We'll catch you next week.
Stay groovy, guys.